Hello, students. In this lecture and the next several lectures, actually, we are going to continue on our exploration of ourselves by delving into some personal assessments. The goal, of course, is for us to get to know ourselves better as students, as learners, as individuals, and as professionals. So specifically in this lecture, we're going to examine learning styles, study environments, and teaching styles. So to start with this week's lecture, let's make a few assumptions. So first of all, I think we can all agree that we are college students, right? And as college students, we could also agree that we're investing resources in this process, this process of getting a college education. So what resources are you investing? And you might say, well, time and money, energy, effort, you're making sacrifices, right? And because you're investing resources, you want a return on this investment, correct? You want to get something more out of this, maybe even than what you initially put in. To be honest with you, what sort of a return you get on this investment depends in part on how well you understand yourself as a learner. So for the next several weeks, we're going to be delving into what's called personal assessments. Today, we're going to look at learning styles and study environments. We're also going to talk about teaching styles, kind of as an extension of learning styles. And in the weeks ahead, we're also going to look at multiple intelligence, emotional intelligence, and personality. So in other words, what we're going to do is we're going to go over the definitions and understand their meanings. We'll then apply that information to ourselves. So we'll do a little bit of self-discovery. Who are you? What do you do? What do you experience in each of these areas that we're going to talk about? And then when we're done, we should have developed a greater self-awareness. Remember, one of those key traits of a successful student. And armed with that awareness, we can use that information to our academic advantage. So for the next few weeks, guys, we are exploring ourselves. First, let's look at learning styles. But before we do anything else, though, we have to ask, well, what is a learning style? We need some kind of a definition. So learning styles refer to the manner in which individuals process information. So you can think of it as how we learn. And we have different ways of processing information. So of course, we essentially have different categories of learning styles. And we actually have 3 different categories of learning styles. We have cognitive learning styles, and that refers to the preferred mode of taking in information. So when you see cognitive there, you think input. Now, expressive refers to the preferred mode of giving out information. So the expressive category you can think of as output. And lastly, social. Social refers to whether a learner prefers to work alone or in a group. So that's the social category. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at each of these categories in a little bit more depth. Okay, let's start off with the cognitive learning style. And of course, we just said that we're focusing on the preferred mode of taking information in. And so that is input. Now, there are, of course, 3 primary cognitive learning styles which draw on our senses. So you can see them there. There are visual learners, those who learn by seeing, the sense of sight. Then we have auditory learners, those who learn by hearing, the sense of sound. And then, of course, tactile learners who learn by touch, by doing, by moving, by physically manipulating things, the sense of touch. Now, normally we talk about 5 senses, not 3 senses. So what are the other 2 senses? What other ways can we take in information besides seeing it, hearing it, and touching it? Of course, the sense of smell and taste, and we can actually learn by smelling and tasting. So for example, if you're in the culinary arts, smelling and tasting would be very important forms of cognitive information, of taking information in. And learning by smell, we can call that olfactory learners, our olfactory nodes, and learning by taste, we can refer to that as gustatory learners. Now, remember, let's go back to the visual learners. Visual learners are those that learn by seeing, and there are actually 2 different kinds of visual learners. There's what are called visual language learners and visual numeric learners. So visual language learners are the ones that learn well from seeing words, in books and computer screens, on boards and in charts. They tend to remember and use information. They tend to learn from books rather than maybe from oral class lectures. So having remembering that information on paper is way more important than hearing it in class. The second kind of visual learner is actually called a visual numeric learner, and they are students who, of course, learn from seeing numbers, again, in books, on computer screens, on boards, and in charts. And they tend to remember and use that kind of information better if they've actually seen it, like visual numbers. They don't require nearly as much oral information. So having those numbers on paper is way more important. And these people, whether they're visual language or visual numeric, they tend to remember things like names and faces. They remember words they've seen in a textbook or numbers that they've seen. For example, they're really good at license plates. Now, when it comes to auditory learners, of course, they learn by hearing. And just like the visual, right, we have two types of auditory learners. We have auditory language learners and auditory numeric learners. So auditory language, of course, they learn from hearing words spoken, and they tend to remember and use information, whether it's words or facts, from hearing. A cool thing about auditory language learners is you may actually hear them vocalizing, seeing their lips move as they read, especially when they're trying to, understand new material. And they also like to study with some soft background music. They like to talk to other people about the subject that they're studying. The auditory numeric learners, the second type, they learn from hearing numbers and also oral explanations of numbers. They tend to remember and use information from hearing the number or from hearing the oral explanation. So this particular kind of learner, you might actually hear them saying the numbers to themselves, or you might see their lips moving as they read a problem. They're really good at remembering numbers. They're good at things like oral numbers and games and puzzles, and a lot of times they can actually recite back what someone has said, whether it's words or numbers. And finally, the tactile learners, of course, these are the ones that learn best by getting physically involved with things. So whether it's their hands, their fingers, their toes, their bodies, but they're actually involved in interacting with whatever the subject or the topic is. So sometimes you'll hear these called kinesthetic learners as well. Okay, so let's take a quick little interactive quiz. Go ahead and number your paper 1 to 3, and you're going to be deciding which type of learning style that we just talked about that the person that I'm going to propose to you probably excels in. And just keep in mind that you can only use each learning style once. So let's say that somebody, number 1, is going to become a massage therapist. Which of the 3 learning styles, the main 3 learning styles, would they excel in? Number 2, going to become a psychologist or a therapist. What kind of learning style would they excel in? And of course, number 3, an architect. Which of the learning styles would they excel in? So I think we could all agree a massage therapist, number 1, they're going to be good in tactile or kinesthetic. Number 2, a psychologist or a therapist, they'd be very good at the auditory. And number 3, the architect would probably be good at the visual. Now, we just looked at careers and how they link to the learning styles, but I want you to keep in mind that a person's career isn't 100% correlated with their learning style, right? But we do notice that certain professions, of course, lend themselves to certain learning styles, right? So if we looked at the visual professions, we might say, a lot of designers, artists, people who make maps, they're called cartographers, engineers, architects, surveyors, anybody who does any kind of driving, navigating, piloting, geographers, those would all be really good. If they were good at visual learning styles, they probably would be good in that career. When we look at auditory professions, obviously we think of musicians and producers, we think of teachers and lawyers and judges, newscasters, DJs. We already mentioned, therapists, psychologists, social workers. So they excel already in that learning style. It might be a good profession for them. And finally, the tactile, the hands-on ones, right? A lot of professions, police officers, stylists, nurses and doctors and surgeons, construction workers, carpenters, sign language interpreters, and again, if that happens to be their learning style, they might excel in that profession. So if you have a particular proficiency in an area, you should definitely pursue it, but if you don't, that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't go into this major or this career. It just means that maybe you're going to have to work a little bit harder to make it one of your preferred learning styles. All right, let's look at the category called expressive. And expressive learning styles, of course, mean the preferred mode of giving out information called output. And our first type of expressive learning style is called oral expressive. And people who are orally expressive can easily tell you what they know. They speak fluently and comfortably, I should say. They seem to be able to say what they mean. They generally aren't shy about giving any kind of an oral explanation or speaking out loud. And so organizing and putting their thoughts on paper may actually seem a bit slow and tedious for oral expressive learners, which is in contrast, of course, with our second type of expressive learner, and they're called written expressive learners. And these are the students who usually write fluent essays, they do well on written tests. They might actually feel less comfortable, maybe even a little insecure when they have to give oral answers or oral presentations because their thoughts are better organized on paper than when given orally. Okay, let's look at the category of learning style called social, and we have two types of social learning styles. The first type is called individual, and you can guess what this is about. These are people who get more done when they work alone. They tend to remember and use information when they have learned alone. They tend not to let others influence them. They value their own opinions, they kind of keep their own counsel, and they have relatively little socializing in class because they're really focusing on the learning process. The second type of social learning is called group learning, and these are ones that value studying with others. They actually don't get as much done when they work alone, and they tend to remember and use information when they have worked collaboratively. So they do value others' opinions and preferences. They value the group interaction because for them it increases their knowledge. So they do highly value class socialization because it is actually part of their learning process.